All right, it's time for DADCAW. Welcome. It is Thursday, the 19th of December, 2019. Before I think we did 12/12/2019, and now we're doing 12/19/19, so I guess it's repeat numbers, man. The doubling of December is true. And that's also the title of the previous podcast, so check that out if you haven't already. It's mostly just Mesk and I talking shit. Eventually we talk a bit about state of gaming and stuff like that, but nothing too in-depth. It's really just a bullshit podcast, but sometimes you like to hear two guys bullshit for a while. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, you know where to find it. So I'm currently actually compiling a version of the Hydra plugin that I'm going to be using for Toddborn, and that leads me nicely into my next point, that Toddborn is indeed in development. Last week or so, we've really gone far with that project and managed to import a dog. That was exciting. Import a dog house as well. Pretty cool. Thanks to Dynamo for sending me those assets. And he also forwarded me the tools so that I can extract more shit as I find it. And other than that, I recently started converting Outlive assets because actually they were extracted and organized by iQuare, but I'm the guy who apparently knows how to convert them to StarCraft's palette, so I've been doing that. It's quite the experience. I do got to say, though, that there's something to be said for just having an array of placeholder graphics. One of the things that I was thinking about recently is that you really don't have much in the way of, like, you've got nothing if you don't have some sort of graphic. If you're trying to come up with the concept for a unit, you are very limited in what your brain will even allow you, at least for me, this is how it works for me. My brain won't allow me to think of a certain concept unless I have a corresponding graphic. And that's why doing my shitty quote-unquote art, the concept art that I do, is actually quite helpful, because even though it's far from an actual unit sprite, it helps me to imagine that in conjunction with a detailed write-up of, like, how many frames is an animation going to be, roughly speaking, and what are the details and stuff like that. And that really does help you feel like what you're designing is actually a unit that you want to make and a unit that you want to include. And I'm in the very privileged position of having a guy that I can, DF, obviously. I could just say, hey, man, throw this in the backlog for you to 3D model eventually. And he just looks at the ever-increasing list of requests with a pensive emoji, but it's still better than having no access to anybody like that at all, and certainly since I don't have the skills to do it myself just yet, it's nice that I don't have to worry about that. I'm wearing too many hats as it is, I think I've said before, so yeah, at least not right now. I'm not planning on getting into 3D myself, but there is something to be said about, like, just being able to have access to a bunch of placeholders, because even if the placeholders are far from your final concept, like the Shaman placeholder in Hydra, it's pretty far from the final concept in terms of functionality, but it's close enough in terms of the unit's silhouette and the sort of art direction I want for the unit. It's actually shockingly similar to what I wanted in that particular case, but so I kind of got lucky. But it's similar enough that it serves to sort of, I guess, have some sort of a halfway point between the ultimate power fantasy or whatever fantasy you're trying to tap into with that unit and whatever placeholder shit you can come up with. Like, you got these two extremes, which is exactly what I want and just something I need to use so that I have something until I have what I want. And sometimes you luck out and you get something that's halfway between or a little bit closer to the what I want. Part of that extreme, that paradigm. But I'm really happy with how just having access to the Outlive units and having access to eventually some of these Command & Conquer and Red Alert 2 units will hopefully provide me with more assets to work with and more concepts. And also just knowing, making the identification, making the observation that you are limited based on what graphics you allow yourself. That is eye-opening in a sense, where you can then say, oh, I wonder, next time you go to design a unit, when you're looking for placeholder graphics or whatever, you got to keep in mind, like, I got to be okay if, with a placeholder graphic that's not at all remotely close to what my final cut is, but that I still have to try to not have the placeholder dictate what the unit's actual capabilities look like. It's difficult, especially if you're trying to make something that has good reads, because it's really hard to read something that looks nothing like what you're intending it to look. So obviously, in that sense, maybe it's just inevitable that you get annihilated in that way. So that was just one of the thoughts that I had recently, is about placeholder graphics and how they inform your capacity to design new units and new tech trees and stuff. And sometimes they even give you ideas that you wouldn't otherwise have. It's almost like a visual language in a sense, where some people say without certain words, without knowing what certain words mean, you can't even have certain thoughts. Like you need the words to define these thoughts that you're having. It's almost like you need the graphics in order to define the units that you want, because without the graphical representation of them or some other representation of them, it's exceedingly difficult to find some way to present that information to somebody else, because you're using a visual medium to do so. It'd be different if you're just writing a book, obviously. Then it's all in your head. You can just write it down. But yeah, you can imagine. For video games, especially when people have to not only understand what something is, but also react to it, it's very important to have good graphics. And by good, I mean on a functional basis, not necessarily on a qualitative basis. Though obviously I would advocate for that as well. And speaking of functional and qualitative mechanisms by which you can assess the quality of something, let's just take a look at Black Mesa real quick. So this is another thing that happened recently, is the Black Mesa review actually got a number of comments, and figured I would address some of the prevailing thoughts, or some of the more interesting thoughts that I came away with that sort of exchange, or set of exchanges. And one commenter, Ryoku75, I believe his username is, he's been on the channel for a while, held up a point that he wasn't really clear on why I was pushing skill expression so much. And, he was saying that in the context of multiplayer, he understands why people pride that, but why would people need skill expression in a single player game when they're not necessarily expressing it to anybody? Like, there's no guarantee anybody watches the videos that I make or streams that I do or whatever, right? But, the average consumer isn't recording or streaming, and certainly it probably is not playing in front of a bunch of friends or whatever. So the odds of anybody else witnessing their skill or lack thereof is pretty low. But I think that was just a fundamental misunderstanding of what I was saying. I didn't mean that skill expression in the way that other people are going to assess your skill and tell you whether or not you're good or bad. The sort of function of skill expression is meant to separate good players from bad players in a qualitative sense and stratify them based on performance. And that's not related to somebody else interpreting that data. It's just that in a game that's designed with skill expression in mind, you will have players that are good and players that are bad. I mean, you're going to have those players anyway, but you'll have more readyable, like actionable data from that if you wanted to do some balance changes. And even if you didn't want to do balance changes, just knowing that your game rewards good skill, high skill gameplay, that is skill expression in and of itself. And if you're not rewarding high skill, then why are you even a game, is usually my standpoint. And so obviously people go for games, they go to games for different reasons. Some people actually want walking simulators because they think it's like relaxing or whatever, and they just want to chill out. They want to use games for very different reasons than trying to compete. But in theory, an FPS is supposed to be a very competitive game. It's about, sort of fulfilling a power fantasy and defeating your opponents, and doing so ideally through skill. That's the only way that you can really actualize that power fantasy, is by saying I was more skilled than the opponent that I defeated, And so in that sense, with FPS games in particular, but also, of course, with RTS games, it doesn't really make any sense to make one of those games and not reward good skill and good play and good strategies. So that's mostly where I come away from that. It's an interesting point, because maybe it is something that does get like there's a misconception about that. When I say skill expression, maybe more people than just Ryoku do think, what is this guy talking about skill expression for? And then I think the other thing was I probably flubbed some language in there where I referenced linearity when I was talking about level design, and I called it like static or something instead of linear. But I don't really quite recall what that commenter was getting at, but I definitely need to go back to the whole franchise of Half-Life at some point, as I have planned to down the past couple of months, and really make a series of like video essays responding to reviews and arguments from people who do think that the game is good, and sort of tackling why I take umbrage with their position. I think the problem with that, and especially specifically with Black Mesa, is that there's so many issues that stem from like visual bugs that a lot of apologists just wave away as either it's not important or it's not legitimate. And I don't understand the not important thing. Like, it's visually interfacing with something. You're supposed to be getting immersed in a world, and then you just see all this very obvious fuckery happen with their visuals, and that it completely just sucks you out of the immersion. At least for me, like I would never be able to get immersed in any, even a movie. Like, imagine you were just watching a movie and that happened, because that's more closer to what Black Mesa is at times. And you're watching this movie and all of the shadows are fucked up or something, you know what I mean? Or like the lights are sorted incorrectly. Am I supposed to just somehow ignore that? Like, there's something to be said for turning off part of your brain that handles lore details, that says, like, you know, that's a suspension of disbelief, where you can still be immersed in something even if you know it's patently impossible in real life. That's not really what I'm getting at, because yes, it is patently impossible that lights sort that way in real life or shadows act that way in real life, but that's not why I'm not immersed. I'm not immersed because it's very clearly an unintended consequence of using a dated engine or being incompetent within that engine. It has nothing to do with, like, yeah, this is what the developers wanted. This is what the SFX, you know, or visual effects, you know, supervisor told the movie's CGI team to make. You know what I mean? Like, has nothing to do with that, right? It's completely separate. So there's another thought that I came away with. It's just, I don't know how people get into that. The people who say the claims are not legitimate, though, are a little bit trickier to diffuse, because those people tend to come at the argument from, you know, well, it's going to be different on every system, and your system may have had some driver issues, or your system may have had an older version, or maybe they patched that out at some point. But the thing is, like, I can't review something I didn't play. So that's pretty much, unfortunately, the only way you can diffuse that argument, because in theory, yes, you can always reduce it to further, you know, system-specific complications, which is just something that's par for the course when it comes to PC games. I just hope that most of my audience, at least, knows that you're not really going to get anything out of going down that rabbit hole and arguing in that direction. Because ultimately, I cannot review what I did not play, and it seems strange to dismiss my own experience that I have from playing the game, because, well, maybe the lag or maybe the other sort of visual issues was due to some conflict between my setup and the game, and maybe it was not even the game's fault and it was all on me. Like, I can't really know that, and I already do automatically dismiss certain performance issues or visual issues based on the fact that, because I can't know that, I just give it the benefit of the doubt, which is certainly not something I'm obligated to do, but just something that I feel I might as well do, because usually games have so many more issues than what those particular problems are, that it's just a drop in the bucket at that point. And I'm not really, it's not like I have nothing else to talk about when it comes to their problems after I dismiss those things. But it is particularly interesting how many people go into apologism mode just when you reference, like, the busted ass graphics, or the, you know, obviously more pressing issue for immersion is AI. The fact that the AI in all of the Half-Life games has been so abhorrent at actually trying to accomplish any one goal, unless it was a set piece. And even then it was like, all right, once set piece mode is active and the unit just becomes more free form, like after it busts out of a closet or something, it's, at that point, it's already done, you know? So it just starts shambling around doing nothing. And that's a big problem. So hopefully developers can avoid that. And like I said at the end of my Black Mesa review, or at least I think I did. Maybe it was at the end of one of the segments. But I hope the team behind Black Mesa is able to figure out that they need to move on from Source, because very clearly it is not equipped as an engine to deal with anything that they are trying to do. And very clearly they are not equipped with the faculties necessary to do what they were trying to do within the Source engine. It's one or the other. It's probably some mixture, some gradation, but hopefully that clears up any further concerns that some of my more diehard listeners have, or just add some interesting commentary to the post-play of Black Mesa and the Half-Life franchise in general. But yes, I will be going back over that and doing some content, some video essays And I think those are the only two things that I wanted to get talked about. It's the graphics and the general like placeholder graphics and stuff for RTS, and then of course the whole Black Mesa talk. But so far this week has been pretty fun. I'm going to try to do this. It just so happened that I think both times so far I've recorded this on a Friday. Or no, today's Thursday, so I guess I didn't. But whatever, I'll try my best to keep it once a week, like I said, and we'll see how that goes. And I'll be streaming later on today, so come on in and say hi. Mwah, kisses.